On this week's edition of Prime Sports Tennis with Andrea Leanne, we'll recap the dramatic premiere event in Prague, the Laver Cup, as Roger Federer defeats a broken down Nick Kyrgios, and a mentally down Kyrgios. Clinch the cup for Team Europe, and we'll also update the latest WTA race to Singapore standings with Caroline Wozniacki and Jelena Ostapenko making the biggest moves, even though there seems to be some confusion on whether Caroline has actually clinched a spot after all. More on that later. We'll also update the WTA ATP Finals standings with 6 of 8 spots still open, with only Rafa and Roger qualifying for London. We've got all that and much more as PST on PSN starts now. All right, it's Tuesday, the 26th of September, 2017. I'm your host, Greg DePalma, and I'm being joined once again by our lead tennis analyst and former top 15 player in the world, Andrea Leanne. And Andrea, the Laver Cup all came down to a match with Roger Federer. Could that have been written any better?
And Nick Kyrgios, it was dramatic. It was exhilarating. It has revolutionized, I think, this sport, Greg, because everyone is still talking about it today. The tweets are all over the place. We were talking about Kyrgios and Isner and Sock all year, some a little bit stale. Of course, Kyrgios saying, only a month or two ago that he was tanking matches. He seemed detached, disinterested. And yet today, it was Kyrgios calling the event amazing, the memories he will never forget. Of course, Isner saying it was, quote-unquote, I'm going to blankety blank fun because it was just so unbelievable. He is tweeting out tickets for next year for the public to buy. And it's Jack Sock, who spent his 25th birthday there, who said he would never want to be anywhere else for his birthday than with his team, Team World, in Prague at the Laver Cup. So they're all calling it absolutely sensational. It has rejuvenated these guys, I think. It has really given them the impetus to go on now on this tour. And just when we thought we'd had so much excitement at the U.S. Open and we were going to get a little bit of a reprieve now in the fall when the players go overseas, not quite. It's the Laver Cup that has pulled back not only the players, but the fans, the corporate interests, and a global TV audience back into professional tennis in such a tremendous way. So lots of lessons, Greg, being learned by all facets of the game, and lots of people scratching their heads saying, boy, why didn't I think of this? But credit goes to Roger Federer and his manager and CEO of Team 8, Tony Gotzik, for really having the bravery and the backbone to forge ahead with the concept, a new concept, to, as they say, try and push the boundaries of the game and do something better for the sport.
Well, what do you think was the biggest thing that came out of this event and compared to the Davis Cup? And like you said, that everybody's probably wishing that they had thought of this idea. And you talked about how they were looking at this as sort of like a Ryder Cup for golf. So what was the biggest impact?
Well, you have to have a first year for everything. So everyone was saying, it has no points, it's an exhibition. The nitpickers who didn't think of it first or didn't have the real gumption to go ahead and proceed with something new, too lazy to do it, didn't feel like it, always criticizing. It was Tony Gotzik, though, who put this team together, an incredible team, all different facets, from marketing to the actual details of putting the court together, this black court. It was absolutely phenomenal. And I think one of the reasons it was great was the attention to detail. We see Roger Federer, meeting with Anna Wintour, meeting with Bill Gates, and all these legends in all kinds of facets of business and the experts in business. And this is a guy who went out and did his homework. He listened to them. He really saw what it took to have a successful formula. And then he invested in Tony Gotzik, his manager from IMG days. And of course, they were at IMG and only left IMG a number of years ago to start Team 8, to start their own venture. So they weren't encumbered by the all the politics of the corporate world and all the limitations of the corporate world, and were able to do what they really wanted to do without having to answer to anyone. And I think that's why they were able to succeed, because there was no consensus building here. They went out, did their homework, put a game plan together, put the best team in there to implement it, and came up with a winner. And one of the reasons, we talked about so many different things, the format. Not all matches were 2 out of 3 with a match tie break for the third set. That was plenty, Greg. We didn't need 3 out of 5. the days of 3 out of 5 are over. It's great for the Grand Slams to, separate them from the rest of the pack. That's okay. But for Davis Cup, Fed Cup, who have, fought so hard to try and shorten these matches for the guys, the 3 out of 5 for the guys, and really struggle with this against an old guard, an old way of thinking, there was no question that this event showed that you showcase the match's best 2 out of 3 with the men. And also we got to see a number of players. You don't just see 1 or 2 matches. They had 3 singles a day with 1 doubles, and that was great. Great variety, great personalities, great contrast in styles. There were surprise lineups each day, especially the last 2 days when, one day they gave the Team Europe captain Bjorn Borg the lineup. The next day McEnroe got the lineup and got to choose who he wanted to pick. So always surprise lineups in the beginning of the day, which made it really exciting because you never knew who was going to play whom. And that's a little bit like Davis Cup, though. The Davis Cup teams are able to substitute if they feel like it, the end result, if they feel someone will do better in that last rubber. So that's there with Davis Cup, but it was the 2 out of 3, the match tiebreak, which really, I think, added incredible amount of excitement. We also look at the court. Boy, why hasn't anyone thought of a black court before? And it was interesting to hear, what Tony Gotzik went through. It's a Harrow court. It was made by the California Sports Surfaces Company in California. They actually went and investigated how to make the blackest of black court to get that depth. And they then made the court there, cut it up into jigsaw pieces, and put it all back together on site in Prague. And so that is such an incredible, effort that they made to go get that. And I have to tell you, Greg, for once I could see the ball on TV. When you have that type of background, the black court, you can see the yellow ball. You can see where it goes. You can see the point so much better. And the players look better, Greg. The manufacturer should have loved this because the clothes look better. The players look terrific. They look like stars out there. And it was such a dramatic setting that it just was it's like going to a concert almost. Not just like a tennis match where you have these fluorescent colors on the court and, blues and greens and oranges and purples all contrasting and fighting with the players and fighting with the other surroundings and the weather and the sun. This was an indoor arena. It did really, really well. And that's just one example of the detail. But, it goes on from there. It's a question of format, choosing the captains. We had John McEnroe captaining the world team. And, of course, as I said, Borg with Team Europe. And wasn't it great, Greg? Did you see John really coaching Jack Sock, really encouraging Kyrgios on? And I think this is going to be the start of something, of people finally recognizing they have to embrace John McEnroe in the scope of coaching, especially in this country. Yes, he's a hothead. Yes, he's temperamental. Yes, he's difficult sometimes to deal with. But boy, does he have something to offer. And what he said to Jack Sock in that match when Jack was playing Nadal, and really getting into him and say, come on and step up. And then Jack really giving it such a great go in that second set, much different performance. This is the type of encouragement and direction Jack Sock needs. We've talked about all year how, he's gotten a little bit stale since such a great start to 2017. Doesn't seem really, invigorated out there in his last few tournaments, especially the Grand Slams, not playing his best. But it was John McEnroe who really got into him and said, come on, let's step up, let's get going. And Jack responded, as did all the other guys.
Yeah, Sock, of course, it was disappointing to see him lose that match, but that went to that super tiebreaker in the third, and that just shows you that he really did fight. Matter of fact, Isner and Sock lost the super tiebreakers in the first day, in the third set, in their first match, singles match on the first opportunity, and then they won doubles together, and then Isner beats Nadal on day 3. So in all, now Querrey didn't have the best event, but Sock and Isner, especially Isner, had himself a pretty good tournament.
Can you imagine John Isner? This is the same John Isner who at the U.S. Open, after he lost to Misha Zverev in a night match, was put on a prime night match at the Open. Everyone was saying, this guy could actually win the title, if he could get to that final. And he loses to Misha Zverev, and in a not very inspiring match said, well, I never win night matches, I can't see at night. Lots of excuses. This is the same John Isner who we just saw beat Rafa Nadal, and did it with unbelievable chutzpah. I mean, it was unbelievable. He was pulling volleys out all over the place and invigorated. And there was Nick Kyrgios, Greg, running onto court, actually. They had a little couch by the side of the court for the teams to sit on, the other team members to cheer on their player. And there was Nick Kyrgios actually running onto the court to to encourage John and, cheer him on. And it was unbelievable. You had to become engaged with all this to see the excitement in these couches of, especially the American squad. I have to tell you, Greg, I mean, the chest bumps and, all the histrionics. And, I mean, with Tiafoe and Shapovalov there, the young guys, loving it. They're doing hole-in-ones and chest bumps and high fives and all kinds of stuff. And they were just so invested. And it's so nice to see this 20-something group of guys really find something that brings their passion back to the game. And it's a team event. This is what team means, and this is why team is so important. And this is also why, Greg, we have to understand why Davis Cup and Fed Cup are so important. And I think one of the biggest things that this Laver Cup is going to do is really give Dave Haggerty now the impetus to go in there and get the changes he wanted made to make these events better.
Yeah, because we talked about how it might even be a good idea, instead of spreading out the Davis Cup all year, is to somehow try and see if you can get it all packed into one event a year. And maybe by having the matches shortened with the super tiebreaker, maybe that makes it a little easier to get these matches moving along, as opposed to grueling matches. And I don't want to play all these matches within a condensed time period. Maybe the faster matches and the excitement of realizing, hey, let's do this for not just one location, different locations, every quarter, put it all into a week or something like that. And then I think this is just another way where you can speed up the process and increase the matches and increase the excitement.
Oh, absolutely. You're so right. I mean, as you said, three out of five, five is long gone. I remember the Olympics last year and and I'm an insider. I appreciate the tennis more than anyone. I appreciate 3 out of 5 efforts from these guys. But, to watch those 3 out of 5 extravaganzas on TV at the Olympics, there was just, it was just way too much. And you're never going to be able to keep a mainstream audience or kids invested for that long. It's just too much. 4 or 5 hours of tennis, no way. 2 out of 3 is plenty. And they don't, Davis Cup can do a little bit of a, balance. They don't have to go the tie break for the third set. 2 out of 3 sets is fine. They obviously, in a Davis Cup, you have 2 singles and, one day, and then of course the doubles, and then 2 singles the next day. So it's not as many matches as Laver Cup would be. But absolutely, the one venue, one way to cut down on so many ties during the year, because it is a draw of where you do have multiple rounds during the year, and to cut down on that time commitment, because as the guys say, look, you play a Davis Cup tie, you're giving up 2 weeks.
Sure.
You got to prepare, get there early, you got the whole week there, and then you can't go play a tournament the day after. You're exhausted and you're emotionally drained from a team event. So it's really 2 weeks. So when you're talking about all the numbers of rounds, it adds up to a very significant investment and commitment. And that's one of the things the guys are having trouble with on a year-to-year basis, and why they feel this should be every other year, every 3 years, whatever. But you're right. If you put the semis and finals in one venue where you can market that event, you can have people coming in from around the world. I know of many, many people who flew over to Prague, just fans of the game, to see this, and they had absolutely perfectly well organized groups going over there, the trips, the packets, and they had a phenomenal experience too. So there's so many benefits to having that centralized location for a venue in the semis and finals. And I hope that Dave Haggerty, who had so much trouble getting a consensus amongst the entire group at the ITF, now I hope he has the ability to go and push this through on his board and get it done. I hope he does a Clint Eastwood and just says, you know what, we're going to make your day this time. We're going to make this event better by getting these changes through, and not let the nitpickers and the old antiquated thinking win out, because there is no question. I think the Laver Cup gives him an example now to say, look, this is what I was talking about. This is what I wanted, and this is what we need to do if we want to make Davis Cup and Fed Cup relevant. And what's interesting, Greg? Players are lining up for next year. These guys want to be on the team. And wouldn't it be nice to see the girls in Fed Cup saying, you know what, I wish we were part of this event. I wish we got some of this, because this looks like fun. And that's where you hope they say, boy, I hope they take Fed Cup with Davis Cup and give us all that same platform.
Put it all into the same event. That would be great. Yeah. And look, they're trying to compare it to the Ryder Cup. And this is what, matter of fact, great timing, because what's coming up this week is the President's Cup in golf. So if they want to actually have, like you were saying, how do you pick and choose when to do these events? Well, if they really want to emulate the Ryder Cup, what you do is you have the Laver Cup one year, Davis Cup the next year, and you rotate them every year. And then you just
and the tours will love you.
well, but that's what the fans would want, and that's that would bring out the type of excitement that you're talking about, and that's what this sport's about anyway. It's about the fans.
Well, you know what? I also hope these individual tournament owners and directors will take a nod from this. There's so many great tournaments on tour. I mean, look, I remember my favorite tournaments were always the Porsche tournament in Stuttgart, and of course it was Hilton Head, the Family Circle at Hilton Head. Now it's the Volvo Cup Open in Charleston. Bob Moran's done a phenomenal job. He's a great tournament director. And it's not even one of the biggest tournaments on the tour, but the players are so invested in it because it's how he approaches it, the attitude, the team, the way the city, he's gotten the city behind it and everyone else behind it. So I hope that these individual tours, so there are some great tournaments on these tours, but there's some that, hey, we need some more push. Yes, Larry Ellison set a model with Indian Wells for the big ones. I'd like the Miami Open to call Tony Godsick tomorrow and say, hey, can you come down and help us? Because, there you have the Miami Open. That should be a phenomenal jewel in this whole entire sport, and you want to see it really flourish. And when you see a guy like Tony Godsick do this with the Laver Cup, you just wonder what that type of creativity and innovation would do for the Miami Open and others that really could use that push. But as you know, Greg, it's very tough, to have to deal with all the politics and so forth in this game. And there's no question that Tony and Roger were able to do this because they had their own entity and controlled their own, controlled the decision making.
Yeah, well, like you said, though, sometimes you just have to do what's best for the sport, even though you're going to have a lot of people complaining. And you're going to have those politics, but somebody's got to make a stand, and hopefully this is a great example of what can work. And by the way, with next year's event in Chicago, and I'm not sure what the time
difference... We're going, Greg. I got my tickets. I'm going.
Now, was the time... Now, I don't know what the time difference was in Prague. Were they holding the matches at night? Prague time?
No, the matches were there were two matches during the day. There's a day session with two singles.
Okay.
And, actually, the last day they started with a double, so that's correct. But the basic gist was you had two sessions, a day and a night.
Okay, cool.
One started at 12 o'clock local time. The other, I think, started around 7 or 7:30 local time. So we were able to see it perfectly well because we could get the first session in the morning when we woke up, and then we could get the night session midday. So it was no problem at all. Tennis Channel did a great job in broadcasting it. I watched so much of it on Tennis Channel because then they, of course, have the analysis with Justin Gimelstob and Paul Annacone and Steve Wiseman and their whole crew of experts. And so it was really, you really could be a spectator for all of it, really get the behind the scenes. That was the other great thing, Greg. Did you see the behind the scenes cameras where you were involved in the decision making with the teams on who was going to play and who was going to do this, and then you had the camera in the locker room, the camera in the player areas, and you got to see all the those off the cuff moments with the players. It was so much fun, and the guys, even Nadal, who's a pretty serious guy, was so engaged in the whole thing. Did you see the point where Nadal and Roger were playing doubles and the lob went up and Rafa went to hit the overhead and so did Roger? And at the very last minute, Roger showed the agility that we all know he has and had a duck to get out of the way. But I think it's the fact that you see these two guys who have been rivals for so long, playing on the same team, on and off court, that was so rewarding. Also, just, again, details, the trophy. We talk about they were honoring Rod Laver. Who better to honor than Rod Laver, for not only, obviously, his encore pursuits of two Grand Slams, complete Grand Slams of all four majors, twice in a row, but he also, it's the off-court generosity and the spirit that he just exudes that everyone so respects and admires. And there they took old trophies of his and melded it into what was the Laver Cup trophy. And so all these attentions to detail, the umpire's chair was in the form of this kind of rocket. Rod Laver's nickname Rocket, kind of that shape of a rocket, the trophy. Tying everything together, all the pieces tied again to really complete this entire picture of an incredible 3-day event.
I will say this, that if they want to take up maximum exposure, and I think this is something that even golf has learned, because golf is going to, in 2 years, they're changing their schedule, so their FedEx Cup playoffs are no longer in September to go up against football. So they've moved it up into August. So if this thing really catches on, hopefully in a couple of years they can decide that. Now, again, I know this is a world event, but maybe when they come back to the United States, it'd be a good idea to hold it maybe in August, because
No, they're not going to hold it before the US Open. I mean, you know why this is such a great time? Because your Grand Slams are over. There's really not much other than the tour, finals and the race to the finals in the fall. And these dates are set. I think it's September 21st to the 23rd next year. And the reason it's so terrific is that you don't have, when you go to the Grand Slams, they have the lead up to all the tournaments and this and that. But they've chosen 2 cities, Prague and now Chicago, that don't have a major professional event in their cities, but they've always embraced the sport so enormously with such a great fan base. It was interesting that, yes, as you said, they fly up against football now and baseball. You would think they would get no coverage. But, was there a football game this weekend? Did anything happen in football this weekend in the NFL? I don't really know, because this so absolutely, monopolized people's attention to see Rafa and Roger and then all these guys, and then the American team. Not the American team, the world team, rather, so invested in this with the emotion. I mean, seeing Nick Kyrgios cry after he lost to the decider to Federer, and in the press conference, he says, "I let the team down," and Shapovalov says, "No, you didn't, bro. No, you didn't." And of course, then all the team chimes in and says, "No, you didn't, Nick." And to see that type of camaraderie, this is the team type of atmosphere that parents want to see, kids want to be a part of, and that's what really grows the game.
All right, so Ryder Cup is and President's Cup. They've got their thing in golf, and hopefully tennis has got theirs with the Laver Cup and the Davis Cup, and of course the Fed Cup, because the Fed Cup final, we're all going to be getting excited about that real soon with the U.S. And by the way, a player that I know will be in representing the United States, Coco Vandeweghe, is like the only player. I'm taking a look at the standings this week, the Race to Singapore standings, and you take and Coco is like the only player not playing this week, and maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Maybe she knew something, because every player.
I know where she is.
Where is she?
She's in San Francisco, trying out a scooter on a visit to her older brother in San Francisco. So I saw her trying to find her way through the San Francisco streets, the winding streets, on a scooter, and I hope she didn't have any kind of injury, because it didn't look so good.
All right.
But no, Coco's she needed some more time off, so that's okay.
Hey, smart.
I think, when you're in the running for a race, you try and get over there when you can. And she is obviously in the top 20 now, so there are a few more responsibilities with that. But we had Madison and Sloane over there. They did fly over to Wuhan. Both lost in their first round match, along with a lot of other seeds.
Everybody
quite frankly.
lost.
We had Halep, Kvitova, Konta, and Wozniacki all losing in their first opening match. Sloane, to me, it looked like, when you fly over on Thursday, you get in Friday or so, you got a day or two to practice. It's really not enough to acclimatize to that type of trip and the conditions. The conditions are very hot and humid there. The court is super, super fast. Quite different from the court at the Japan Open that Wozniacki won last week, and getting her seventh final, getting her first title of the year. I think that's 8 or 9 consecutive years she's had a title now, so quite an accomplishment. But that court was really slow, Greg, and she got in obviously just on Monday, had no time to adjust, and it was really fast. Went out to Sakari today. Sloane, to me, it was just a question of the fact that she herself said did not move her feet. Obviously, perhaps whether it's jet lag or, as we said, trying to get accustomed to the conditions, who knows? But now she'll have a week to get ready for Beijing, which is the bigger event. Keys did cite, again, wrist issues. She said that it should not be serious, that she has not gotten enough time to really rehab this wrist as she needed to after the surgery. Probably, again, we remarked that she had two procedures, the second one after the French, and really needed more time, but because she was in the middle of the season, just went with it. So we'll have to see about Key. She says she may have to readjust her schedule and not play as much. So I don't know if she'll be in Fed Cup or not, but I think that the girls, it's interesting because we talked about this group of guys, Kyrgios, Isner, who obviously seemed a little bit disengaged, in the last few months, and now, of course, they're reinvigorated. We see the girls over there. I've watched the pre-interview snippets they do with the girls, part of their player obligations for the tournament, and they seem a little bit tired, a little bit detached. And when you've gone through a whole year, about 9 months now, and then you have to make another swing back to Asia, it is tough, and it's a long way to go. And so, I think right now they're eyeing the finals and trying to get there. I think we have our top 8. There are potential situations where someone else could jump in if someone pulls out of the event or someone wins Beijing that's not in the top 8. But it looks like we have our top 8 because Ostapenko also won last week in Seoul, and so she's really solidified her spot at 8.
Yeah, and Ostapenko actually is the first hard court WTA title of her career. So she moves ahead of Konta. Konta drops to 8. We talked about Wozniacki, who should be sitting there at 5 and Venus at 6, but then now there's some confusion about whether, not that it should matter because we'll both see Wozniacki and Venus in the WTA Finals, but I mean,
a little confusion because the Race to Singapore leaderboard on the WTA site today lists Caroline over Venus. And so people feel, well, if Venus is in, that must mean Caroline is in. There's some sort of computation going on behind the scenes, a difference of 100 points or so. So there's a lot of different variables. Quite frankly, Greg, I still haven't figured it all out. I'm going to go with what the WTA said. They say she's not in yet, and she needs 100 points. That's what I'll go with. She needs the points from Beijing, though, which is the premier mandatory event on the tour. So for some reason, that's the case, and so we'll go with that and say, she will most likely, though,
she's going to get
points
in
when she appears in Beijing.
Yeah, I mean, the only way, again, is if someone like Kuznetsova or Mladenovic wins in Beijing, and then, I don't know, Konta loses in the first round. I mean, and we don't even know if that'll be enough. So,
well, I did a little bit of the math, and of course, at this stage, since the math seems to be so confusing at this stage, it's hard to know if these are correct calculations. But the person who's number 9, Milanovic, and then Kuznetsova is the one I think you have to really watch is Kuznetsova. Remember, she was the one last year who flew to Moscow to get those points and beat Konta out at the last minute. Konta was already in Singapore, already had done the PR photographs with the other girls. And in fact, Kuznetsova was able to win that title and had a private plane to Singapore to push her out. But that was very dramatic. I think, though, she's probably the only one you can look at as a potential. I think the Keys and Sloane are a little bit too far away. They obviously have played a partial season this year because of the injuries and only coming back really later in the season. I think that we have a good 8, though, if that's the case. Certainly the number 1 ranking should be decided on by the time the season is over between Muguruza, Pliskova, and Halep. Of course, Svitolina's in there, Wozniacki's in there, and Venus. But along with Konta and Ostapenko, I think that will be a very bright top 8 women.
And by the way, Wozniacki won for the 9th straight year. And she did it almost, in the last possible event, moving up, as we mentioned, to potentially number 5. But more importantly, she gets her first win in her 7th final this season. So not only did she finally break through and win, but she extended her streak.
Well, I want to give a shout out to Caroline because, she was very disappointed after the U.S. Open, really was upset, had her feelings hurt. She was put on court 5 for a match because of all the rain delays and so forth, and ended up on a bit of a better show court. But, had her nose out of joint about that, and we understood that. That was understandable. I mean, she's been to the finals of the U.S. Open. She's been number 1 in the world before. And so she had to come back. She said she took 10 10 days off. And we're going to give John McEnroe another assist for this because she took 10 days off after that loss at the Open to Makarova. And we started hitting with John McEnroe at his club, at his academy. And I saw the tapes of the workouts. And, this is where John McEnroe just has that intensity and that drive and that, excitement in him. And just getting on the court with him, you could see a different Caroline Wozniacki. All of a sudden, her hand-eye got quicker. All of a sudden, her shots got a little bit sharper. And sure enough, she gets to the Japan Open and had a very tough draw. Had to beat Muguruza, beat Pavlyuchenkova in the final. And it was interesting. In that final, which I watched, yes, I got up at like 2 in the morning to watch it. She had only 3 unforced errors, but it was a different Caroline who was so much far more aggressive and offensive, taking control of the points, hitting winners, the serve, 6 aces from Caroline. And so it showed that, we all know she's a tremendous athlete and she's such a great runner, but she also can play aggressive tennis and she also can play offensive tennis and not worry about making mistakes. Only 3 unforced errors in that match, as I said. And so she understands the balance very well of defending and attacking. And because she has already a margin of error on her shots with that slight bit of spin and getting her racket head under the ball, she's not going to come up with all these unforced errors as Pavlyuchenkova did, quite frankly, and hitting very flat and hard, hit or miss tennis. So it was good to see Caroline moving the ball more, having more depth on her shots. These are all the things we talked about, Greg, at the U.S. Open with Caroline, as we have all year, is that she needed more depth. She just cannot be a retriever and expect to win these titles, and that's why she had gone 0 for 6. And so there was a big difference in this last one, in this 7th appearance in the final. This was a different Caroline, and this is a Caroline who could be #1 in the world because not that she's going to come out and beat Serena Williams next year, but she plays so many events, and she's so present and so supportive of all the tour and all levels of tournaments that she is really, if she comes out with this new game style and continues to train with people like John McEnroe, I think it's really going to help her at this later stage in her career.
All right. As far as the men are concerned, again, as you mentioned, look, the men, not much to go on here because we have a few weeks to go, and there's only, again, Nadal, Federer clinched, even though we have a pretty good idea of at the top who's going to get in, but there's still a lot of players who can wind up getting into the WTA ATP Finals. So hopefully Sam Querrey, who right now, because of a couple of players that aren't going to be able to make it, he's sitting there at, I believe, the number 8 spot. So it would be nice to see if he can get in, but still a long way to go before we determine those last few spots for the men.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot more question mark there. I mean, Sam probably did not play his best tennis at the Laver Cup, not obviously as well as he did at Wimbledon in other events this year. And so, yeah, he's going to have to up the level in his game because he's going to get some competition from the guys right below him. And when you go to these fast indoor courts where guys like Tsonga and even Kyrgios and guys do well on, he's going to have a lot of, he's got to look over his shoulder a little bit and produce his best tennis. But, no, we have Rafa and Roger. And I think one of the best pieces of information, Greg, is that we hear Novak Djokovic has just signed Andre Agassi on for 2018. It's a go. He plans to play at the Australian Open. He is obviously rebooted himself, and he feels that obviously this injury is not going to be an issue, and he has re-signed to bring Andre Agassi back on board as his full-time coach.
All right, and then Azarenka. So Azarenka is not gonna. Well, she may play, right? There's a possibility.
Well, the good news about Vika, of course, she's been going through this custody battle with her ex-boyfriend over young son Leo. That's what prevented her from playing the U.S. Open because in the custody trial, she's not allowed to take her son out of California until it's all resolved, which is due to resolve in October. So she chose to stay there, obviously, to be with her son and put the tennis aside until that is resolved, which is exactly what you need to do when it involves your child. But we did see for the very first time now in quite a while in her tweets, Vika back on court. So she is back hitting. I saw her on a pickleball court. I saw her at the beach with her son. Lots of great photos and lots of mommy and me time. But we finally have seen her today, for the first time today, back on court. And I can only guess that if she is back practicing and doing her stretching, that perhaps she may make an appearance at some point before the year is out in one of these events. That would be nice. She did sign on Michael Joyce as her coach. So it'd be nice if she got a couple matches, and obviously the family issues behind her as well, so that she could start 2018 on a fresh note. Because the game needs her. She's a tremendous competitor, and with all these mommies now on tour, we have Serena tweeting out she wants to become the first Grand Slam mother since, of course, Kim Clijsters and Yvonne Goolgong, and Margaret Court did so. So that would be a fresh page too, and having Vika back.
All right. Now our next show is actually going to be on Saturday, and that is because we have the draw coming out later this week, which is actually going to be hopefully Friday. I believe we're going to get the draw for the China Open.
Yeah, right. Well, Beijing is next week. That's the big one for the women. That's the premier mandatory. The men are also in Beijing. Their big one is in Shanghai the next week. Because of course their season goes longer than the women's. They go into November. The women end in October. So we'll have Beijing for the women, and then of course the finals is a couple weeks later in Singapore. It's coming down to the nitty gritty, Greg. Coming down to counting points and trying to end your season on the highest note. We won't have Sibylkova, the defending champion, in the finals for the women. She will probably not make it, but a lot of great personalities and games. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so again, it'll be a draw show. So a special edition of Prime Sports Tennis. We'll take a look at the China Open in Beijing. We'll tweet out at Prime SN and let you know. And, of course, Andrea will let everybody know on Facebook exactly when we're going to do the show. But we're probably going to do it on Saturday, this Saturday, as soon as the draw is out. Maybe Sunday, but we're aiming for Saturday. So we'll let everybody know. And again, don't forget, all the shows are on demand. So if you missed a live show, we will tweet it out and make it available at YouTube, on our YouTube page at Prime Sports Network, and our iTunes page immediately following the show. So even if you missed a live show and you're busy over the weekend, which is going to happen, you'll be able to still tune in anytime over the weekend before the event starts on Monday. And then we'll do this show all over again next week and update the latest headlines in professional tennis. So Andrea Land, appreciate it as always, and we'll talk to you in a few days.
Terrific. I look forward to it. Very exciting week.
Absolutely. I agree. Thanks, Andrea. All right, so that'll wrap it up. Make sure to tune in, by the way, at the end of the season on Prime Sports Tennis for our 2017 Aces Awards show. So we're looking forward to that. You can also, as I mentioned, check out all of our PSN on-demand shows, usually within a few hours, following every broadcast on the PrimeSportsNetwork.com website, iTunes, and YouTube pages on the Prime Sports Network. Once again, thanks for tuning in to Prime Sports Tennis with Andrea Land on the Prime Sports Radio Network, and we'll see you soon.